I'm thrilled today to have our guest, Michael Katz, on our podcast today. Michael is a second-time guest on the show, and as many of our listeners are quite familiar with, he's founder and CEO of mParticle. Michael, you want to say hi?
Hey, thank you for having me back. Am I the first two-time guest?
I believe you actually are. We are scheduling a couple of others, but I believe you are, definitely our first. Now that I think back on it, great. So Michael and I actually, for our listeners, Michael and I, spent a decent amount of time this summer, just getting together and talking about the category and where the market of data and MarTech and everything in between is heading. And we thought it might be helpful to come back to the table, and have a conversation around the future of CDPs as a category. What's fact, what's fiction, what's myths, and cover sort of everything across actual trends and marketing buzzwords and flashy headlines, including the composable CDP and beyond. So with this, Mike, why don't we just get into it? And let's kick off with sort of a basic question around what are some of the core technology and market changes that are affecting the CDP landscape today?
Yeah. So I think that there's a number of direct changes within the space. I see probably more indirect changes. I think we were talking about this a few weeks back, but it feels like there's more indirect competition than ever before, or more vectors of competition. So I guess before I get into changes in maybe the competitive landscape, I just want to make a quick point. I think increased competition is a good sign of a really healthy market. If competition was going away, if people were focusing their efforts somewhere else, that would probably be more concerning to me. And I think a lot of it has to do with a number of the more kind of macro tailwinds. So not necessarily just the economy, although I do think that there's something to be said around teams needing to do more with less and do better with their data. And then I think there's also something to be said around basically every company needing to build a first-party data strategy. If you value the digital experience, and how can you not, if you value the customer experience, you have to deal with all of the complexity that's been thrust upon all of us from the changes from Apple and Google around identity, from cookies to IDFA, and really everything in between, increased regulatory considerations and restrictions, and just the need to ultimately value consumer privacy as a fundamental human right. All of those things have created a bit of a ripple effect, if not more than that. Probably hear my dog barking at me in the background. That's for added effect.
I mean, does he agree or disagrey?
No, she's my height woman, so she very much agrees, I think. And I think right now is the time. The industry has been going through so much transformation, and so everybody's trying to figure this out. And so now what you have is the modern data stack, which is typically oriented around solving data engineering challenges, starting to converge with the customer data stack. You have companies in the application layer who focus on customer engagement. And I would maybe even respectfully put you guys in there. Also converging with more of the customer data infrastructure. That kind of is the CDP space. The CDP space is weird because it's almost at the intersection of traditional IT systems and marketing tech, and there's no other kind of great examples like that. And so all of this change and all of the increased focus on creating strong first-party data foundations has everybody saying, well, then I'm a CDP too. And I think that's what we're all feeling.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think part of the challenge in the category is just the width. Michael, on our last episode, we sort of covered the notion of garbage in, garbage out. I think one of the great strengths of mParticle is really just making sure the data collection happens in the highest fidelity possible. And to your point, yes, I mean, our core focus, from Simon's perspective, is on the application side. And then of course, in between all of this is an emerging layer of data infrastructure. And so getting back to the question, what are some of the driving forces that are shaping the category? From our perspective, certainly, the modern cloud data warehouse has been front and center. And it seems as if there's sort of two clear leaders that we're seeing in the market across BigQuery and Snowflake. And Amazon has a solution that was early to market with Redshift, but it's certainly struggling from a technology perspective. And Microsoft is pushing Synapse hard, but of course Snowflake can deploy on top of any of these platforms. So we're to your point around how does CDP fit in the context with this? Well, every modern enterprise today is also asking how does CDP fit into my data strategy? The times are behind us where your MarTech strategy is a closed loop system. That just puts a pixel on the site in a vertically integrated fashion to solve all of your marketing problems. It's really emerged as a much more integrated set of sort of opportunities, and your CDP strategy needs to actually think rather in a more integrated way relative to your data strategy, relative to not just your marketing strategy, but your customer experience strategy more broadly. So it's definitely a shift across thinking much less vertically focused across a narrower set of use cases, a narrower set of functions, to being much broader and horizontal with data at the core.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And again, I think this is a sign of a healthy market, one that's growing and evolving. Right? Like, I think Jeffrey Moore nailed it with crossing the chasm. I don't think that the CDP space has fully crossed the chasm. So I think what that ends up meaning is that the killer application, which is personalization, which is typically in service of some business goal, ultimately kind of becomes the defining characteristic rather than like the kind of core enablement infrastructure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, I think, we're still at a place where folks are really trying to figure out, where's the center of gravity for all this stuff. And, and even with that, what are the core use cases they should be focusing on? And you definitely have a bit of the cart driving the horse, and the capabilities, dictating what you should be doing, which, will ultimately all iron itself out as the market matures.
Yeah, well, and I think in an early market, I don't think that that's wrong to tout like features and functionality and get people rallied around your vision for the world, because that's ultimately what you're dealing with. You're dealing with more visionary technology buyers who can connect the dots and they can see the future. But as the market evolves and matures, you're dealing with more pragmatic technology buyers, right? And it's about solving their problems, not like, hey, look at this new way of doing the same thing that you've been doing, but it's now 10x better. Like they don't necessarily always connect the dots.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think sort of getting back to sort of emerging capabilities and look, what I find so interesting about the cloud data warehouse, and sort of modern data infrastructure is that for a certain set of use cases, it's incredibly well understood. Set up your cloud data warehouse, put a BI tool on top of it, and then run queries every month, or run queries every morning for that matter, to understand how the business is moving. Yet when you sort of look at sort of this broader set of applications in front of us, I do think there are some key considerations that need to be addressed. And look, from my perspective, while the data warehouse, like the origins are firmly rooted in reporting and analytics, but the real potential, and I think both you and I both sort of see things moving, is obviously using data beyond just analytical use cases and for it to be the operational backbone of the modern enterprise. And certainly the movement of these services to the cloud has increased adoption tremendously. I remember when we actually first founded the business, seeing Redshift available by the hour in AWS, and I was like, oh well, this is going to be game changing. And it was. And today, when you sort of look at the capabilities, the potential across a fully elastic and expandable cloud infrastructure that has all your first party data, it's tremendously exciting. and really, I think can satisfy a tremendous number of use cases. The one thing that I think is still a bit of an open question is while the cloud data warehouse can't scale to low latency use cases, there are sort of true real-time use cases where things become a little bit trickier on exactly how that fits into the ecosystem.
Fully agree. I mean, I think first I would question the assumption: can a generalized pipeline, which is constructed for reporting use cases, can that be repurposed to solve for personalization use cases when there are a number of nuances that ultimately need to be solved for, which aren't contemplated by generalized pipelines like ETL as a service? So that is the first question, because I think the premise that all the data already exists in the data warehouse and all you need to do is reverse ETL it out, that's such a gross oversimplification of what the actual challenges are. Everything from the real-time use cases, which you just mentioned, to more sophisticated customer journey management. So you can't take into account more complicated sequences in those instances, because oftentimes you don't have that real-time bidirectional connectivity back and forth, to just the overall complexity that is required by trying to unbundle anything and everything within what is a more opinionated approach, right? So the idea is just because you can do something, doesn't mean you should, right? The order of I think we talked about this last time, but the order of operations matters. Identity resolution and getting that right in the first mile, that matters, rather than trying to do that after the fact. And there's just a lot of bad self-serving advice out there. And when you take into account the total economic impact relative to the total cost of ownership, the argument that faster time to value realization, actually, that may be true, but then you hit a bit of a brick wall. And what you see is value recede, because the complexity drives compounding human capital cost. It also drives compounding compute costs. And that's nobody's intention, but if you don't take into account the whole picture and solve these problems holistically, you get people saying, "Oh, this stuff is the greatest." You get other people saying, "No, it's not," and we end up having this ongoing debate that we've had on and across LinkedIn for the past 6 months.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think speaking of noise in the system, and maybe we can sort of get to my next question is, why don't we try to dig into some of the trends that that you're seeing and that we're both seeing in the market, and what practical guidance can you give customers to separate the market ops and opportunities around disruptive technology that can really drive value across some of the use cases we've been talking about here, versus market ops as compared to just pure marketing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would go back to one of the points I just made, which is just because you can do something doesn't mean you necessarily should, right? So while you can unbundle technology, and there's no argument that is a natural law of technology, it doesn't necessarily mean that unbundling results in net value being accrued to the customer and to the business, right? I see market ops and marketing is those challenges are very much intertwined. So in order to deliver great personalization and marketing experiences, you simply cannot ignore or discount how operationally complicated it is to execute, right? The digital ecosystem is in a steady state of change. And that creates a whole bunch of change that organizations have to deal with. So you can't just say like, hey, here's my personalization strategy. You have to say, how well prepared am I to absorb the shock that happens throughout the organizations that are trying to execute these strategies? And what are my vulnerability? Or what is my vulnerability? What are my vulnerabilities to those changes? And they're not necessarily opposing forces. I think it's a bit yin yang. Like they are two parts of the whole. You can't really do one without the other. You have to solve both at the same time, because the best strategy with weak execution is not going to deliver the optimal results. And great execution of a poorly constructed strategy, also you're leaving a bunch of money on the table. Now, I'm not like here to say one of those is better than the other, but you really do need both sides of the equation. But I would love to see like how are you guys thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, one thing, like coming at it from the other side, of the coin, and how do you build an application that you can actually leverage your existing data strategy to affect great personalization, and custom experiences. Yeah, I think one of the fundamental challenges is the value proposition of the category does sit at the intersection of marketing and customer facing teams on the one side and the data teams on the other. And I think for folks who have been in the space for a period of time and understand the problem well, I think there's there's differences of approaches. For newer entrants in the category who have come together and formed alliances around a problem they don't understand, they've just added pure noise to the system. Michael, I know you and I spoke earlier in the summer around like, hey, like let's respond to this whole composable CDP business that High Touch put out, and I guess went through it from an application perspective, and I'm like, there's so many holes in this. I don't see how this is even slightly usable, across identity and real time, and majority of the use cases that we know are high value and are required to be put in place to be successful, aren't even addressed, or considered, much less part of this new unbundling, which is ostensibly solves an understood problem, or at least an understood set of use cases in a better way.
I mean, I think the whole thing is like, it's a load of crap, actually. Like, I think it's like a marketing spin on reality, right? Like, why would anybody choose to use a reverse ETL solution over you guys, right? When like the key defining characteristic of reverse ETL is you can consume data from the data warehouse directly. Now, I think like that's going to be a feature that probably every CDP is going to have, right? I think our difference of opinion is that the data warehouse is a valuable source of customer data. It's not the only valuable source of customer data. But if every CDP, like let's play this out, if every CDP has this feature, and there's a number of CDPs like you guys that already do, that also have a ton of other features that have been built out for the past several years, why would you choose a reverse ETL vendor who can't do half the stuff that you guys can do? Half, like they can't do 80% of what you guys do, right? So it's like you're getting 10% maybe of the functionality. And then when the market continues to acknowledge the fact that the data warehouse is not going anywhere, like it is going to be here to stay. And I do believe that those two markets, which are adjacent, will start to converge and potentially overlap. What do those guys have that anybody else doesn't? The answer is like literally nothing other than the same shitty blog posts that they keep publishing over and over again.
Yeah, no, I mean, I always joke, the MVP of Simon Data was effectively reverse ETL today.
Exactly.
And the only two differences were, one is we were 6 years earlier to market, and two is our marketing chops weren't nearly as good as the current incumbent category.
Well, I would probably argue differently because your business is significantly bigger than theirs. They're just noisy.
Yes.
That's all it is, right? And let's not confuse noise with actual success.
Yes, which gets back to the original question around marketing ops versus pure marketing. So, look, I think there's a lot of smart people, within space working on, working on these problems, but there's sort of a lot of maturation that needs to happen.
Amen. Yeah, no argument here. Yeah, I think the big question that has still gone unanswered from like a bunch of those guys is, what proof is there that their argument is just and has actually created net economic value for their customers that couldn't be achieved through a different strategy, a different approach, a different architecture. It's not like they're talking about a bake-off that's been run. They're just saying, hey, look at me. Friends don't let friends buy CDPs. But you're building like a little small shitty CDP, and you don't want to call yourself a CDP, but that's really what you are. Like, the whole thing, to me, it's like I have a tough time reconciling a lot of this stuff because it just doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
Yep. So let's maybe, it's sort of a good segue for maybe sort of the last question I have in my notes, which is let's actually break down the CDP value chain end to end for a few minutes, starting with data quality, and winning the first mile, and then getting to some of the final bits around what it really is required to effectively enable data through a modern application strategy.
I think it starts with good, clean, permissible access to data. And I think for us, you can see in some of our recent investments in our audience sequences, or our journey builder tool, the acquisition of Indicative to improve insights along that customer journey, as well as Fedora, who will help augment that customer journey through some of the features that they've built out around machine learning and whatnot. It starts with accessibility, just making sure you have a layer of truth to your kind of core data asset. And that's again, you have to protect data integrity and reliability. You have to make sure that the thing that you think you have is the thing that you have, actually. And then for me, it's probably as you move into the pipeline, getting a better understanding and getting more customer context and being able to continuously improve and enrich the customer profile through probably the stuff that I mentioned before, which actually I would pull out of that and put more kind of into the middle. And as you're moving data through this pipeline, increasing transparency, and there's a really kind of core operational aspect of this stuff. Hey, I thought I was collecting 100 events. How come only 99 are showing up? Where is it getting stuck, or where's data getting dropped or lost? Is it coming in with the right structure and format? Is it coming in and reconciling properly, and then also just understanding the why behind the what? So it starts with truth, and then you assign meaning to the data, improving context, and then it's just about activation and and automation. And I think our job is, as we've talked about, to make sure that we never cross that line into customer engagement. We're never gonna activate the data directly. We're never gonna serve ads. We're never gonna push emails or deliver push notifications or any of that stuff. We're not the UI layer or engagement layer in any way, shape, or form. Our job is just to make it better, right? The old BASF commercials, we don't make the tires, we make them better, right? We don't make the paint, we make it bluer. Our job is not to provide the application, it's to amplify the usefulness of that through improving the customer data. And I think that when you have companies out there that are arguing on behalf of like this faster time to value, like there's always a cost, right? There's always a cost, whether you pay the cost up front. That's usually the best way to do it. But like we're all building businesses. We all have 1,000 fires to put out. Sometimes we may not necessarily have that luxury, but we also have to understand by not doing it right up front, this is just another form of tech debt. Data debt and tech debt are one and the same, right?
Yep.
And it's going to be worse. Like it is way worse when you have to burn it down 6 months, a year, 2 years from now. And that's the thing that I really take exception with like a lot of these reverse ETL vendors, is like they are leading companies down a really wrong path that pretends that there is a shortcut to winning. Like we've been building companies now for many, many years. Like if you know shortcuts to winning, tell me, because I have yet to see any.
Yep. No, we considered trading notes over the summer on how to do that. But yeah, couldn't agree more with you on Michael. The other side of this, look, is, just as you guys have a relentless focus on the quality of data, our perspective focusing on the application is look, everyone in the market talks about one-to-one personalization. Yet at the end of the day, if the application that personalizes can't represent data in a granular way, then what's the point? And when we see, really the role of, our sort of side of the CDP opportunity, it really comes in rethinking the application tier. Let's not talk about one-to-one personalization anymore and assume that that's as a given around where you want to go to, but let's instead talk about one-to-one data. How can you make sure that the right data, that's specific, that represents a broad set of use cases across the customer lifecycle, across customer behaviors, across the unknown unknowns that may be required to be effective and gain market share in Q1, Q2, and Q3 of next year. So you want to identify, how do you make sure that that wealth of data and the future capabilities can be properly represented in your application tier. Just last week, Salesforce announced, Snowflake integration into their CDP. But at the end of the day, look, if you're going to be using Salesforce's CDP, well, you're locked into be using Salesforce's application. Salesforce application is built on data infrastructure that is now officially 20 years old. If you look at the breadth and scale of real-time systems like mParticle, and all of the massive investments that brands are investing in their Snowflake and BigQuery, there's a massive disconnect between what the potential is, what the actual expectations of the customer are from an end use case perspective, and what the technological capabilities are to actually affect that. So when we sort of look at the end-to-end pipeline, our focus is on the application side, and really what we see is the incumbent applications are just insufficient to drive a broad set of use cases required to win in the market. And while with endless integration capabilities, you can affect any of these use cases. I think one of the the name of the game from our perspective is actually speed of execution. It's not necessarily that you need to access all your data, but it is necessarily that you need access to all your data so that when new use cases come about, next quarter, you can execute against them, in hours and not weeks, or longer.
Yeah, I agree, and I think maybe this is like one area where our thinking may diverge a little bit, but I think it does. I think in either case, like the access that you want to your data, like you still want to make sure it's like the right data and it's of good quality and you can trust it and all that kind of stuff. Our view historically has been like, there's a lot of advice out there around like, well, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it kind of thing. And our view has always been like, employ a lean tagging approach, like be mindful of the data, like stop, pause, and like think through the customer life cycle, even the product life cycle, and how are different consumers going to want to consume that data, because that serves like that data design process serves as like a really important forcing function. And whether that ends up in a CDP, whether it goes to a data warehouse first, I think like the key point is like you can't skip that step. But what we're seeing, and I think the market reality is like that requires a level of data maturity. And the truth is a lot of companies do skip that step. Maybe because they don't know how, maybe they don't have the expertise, maybe they don't have the time because they're growing so fast and like there's bigger issues to address. Whatever the case may be, I think companies end up at some point having to solve for this. And my advice is that earlier you can do it, the better, because it won't go away and it doesn't solve itself on its own.
Yeah, no, 100%. And ultimately, a winning playbook starts with having accurate data, that actually represents the right aspects of what your customers are doing.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, I think the thing that's clear to me and in really all of our conversations is like there's a number of areas where I think we have very similar, if not the same view. I think in areas where maybe our views differ, we're still focused on solving the same problems, but maybe coming at it from slightly different angles, but still get to like the same point ultimately.
Yep. No, look, and we have, for listeners to the podcast, we also have many, and several shared customers as well, which just sort of speak to how, both the category, is evolving, and just sort of the difference in our value propositions as two different providers, in a sense, within the same space today.
Yeah. Amen. Couldn't have said it better.
Awesome. So with that, Michael, thank you for coming on to today's episode of the podcast and sharing your wisdom with us. Really just sort of summarizing, the episode. Categories move tremendously quickly, and it'll be very interesting to come back here. I think I said the same thing 6 months ago. I'll say the same thing today. It'll be great to come back 6 months again from now, and discuss how the category is evolving. I think we will, certainly get to a place where, folks who are saying something of substance will be heard and received, and those who will not will be fatigued. And I think that we will get to a point of much better clarity than we see today. I think today we actually have a better point of clarity than what we saw 6 months ago. So excited to continue the conversation and to see where the category progresses.
Yeah, same here. I was laughing before because I'm not sure if or how these companies will fatigue, because it seems like people will just keep throwing stuff against the wall till kingdom come. But yeah, we will definitely see. It'll just be new stuff that they're throwing against the wall.
Well, the companies fatigue when the market fatigues of them.
Yeah, that's true. That is very much. Yeah. Amen.
Great. And Michael, for anyone who wants to learn about mParticle, how can they do so?
I'm going to send them to your house directly. I'm kidding. Just go to our website, www.mparticle.com. Check us out on Twitter @mparticle, or hit me up directly.
Great. And thank you to everyone listening to this episode of the Data Unlocked podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Simon Data, please visit us on the web at simondata.com or email us at hello@simondata.com.